Hello, and welcome to this very first episode of Someone You Know, a podcast about disabilities, those who have them, and those who love them. I'm your host, Andrew Abraham, and for this first episode, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about why this podcast exists, who it's for, who I am, and why all of you out there should be listening. After that, I'm going to be talking with my guests here about their experience working with people that have autism and other intellectual and developmental disabilities, and how knowledge of disability studies and disability culture can help those that we work with. Joining me are two very special guests with a wide range of experience in disability support service. First, we have Miss Ashton Hudson, who's worked alongside myself at the Easterseals Metropolitan Chicago Academy as a paraprofessional for the past 4 months. She's passionate about serving others and empowering those with disabilities based on her experiences with friends and family. Thank you for joining me, Ashton. Next, we have my amazing supervisor from Easterseals, Miss Carrie Knox, who has been with the organization since 2010. She currently serves as the Student Services Coordinator at the Easterseals Metropolitan Chicago Academy, where she helps students and families navigate the landscape of special education, as well as helping staff members develop as professionals. Thank you for joining me, Carrie. Now, if you haven't heard of these organizations or job titles, don't click away just yet. I will be explaining all of that and more with the help of my guests. Now, if you or someone you know has a disability, then this podcast is for you. And even if you don't know anybody personally with any disability or you don't have one yourself, chances are someone you know loves someone with a disability. And by listening here today, you'll become just a little bit more informed about disabilities and those who have them. Let's get started. Now, first things first, who am I and what is this podcast for? My name is Andrew Abraham. I'm currently a student at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm majoring in anthropology, which is the study of human culture and civilization, and disability and human development, which delves into disability studies. And I'm also minoring in linguistics. I've worked as a special education paraprofessional in K through 12 school settings since the summer of 2024, and I'm currently working at Easterseals as a paraprofessional in downtown Chicago. But most importantly to me, and for the sake of this podcast, I am the sibling of someone with autism. My younger brother Matthew has influenced every aspect of my life since his diagnosis, and I have been exposed to an entirely different way of approaching and viewing the world based on my experiences. My family also has been shaped and has grown in response to raising a child with a disability and the many, many challenges that we faced, and the many things that many families take for granted when seeking support for their children. Anyone who has a family member with autism, especially a child or a sibling, will kind of know what I'm talking about, and it's something we'll discuss a little bit later on. Now, I'm also a member of the Honors College at UIC, and as an Honors College student, I'm tasked with creating a capstone project that represents the culmination of everything that I've been working on since joining UIC as a student. I've been given a lot of flexibility with what I want my project to be, and I've decided instead of going the traditional research paper route, I would use my experience as an anthropology student, a disability studies student, a paraprofessional, and a sibling to create a podcast that talks about the lives of people with disabilities, the people who love them, and those who work with them in hopes of creating bigger conversations between all those kinds of people in real life. Especially now that I've been on both sides of the system, I know just how important honest and open communication between the people who work with family members can be. Now, learning about disability studies as a field and disability culture as a concept has given me a lot of tools and skills to more critically reflect on my experiences with disability growing up and as a professional. And I'm hoping that there are some of you out there in a similar position, whether you are a sibling or a professional working in special education, healthcare, direct support professional work. If anybody has anything that they can relate to, I hope that I can give some context and information that I have greatly benefited from. And as I mentioned earlier, I have two very special guests with me to talk about disability, special education, and many other topics in disability studies that led me to Easterseals and the decision to start this podcast. Please welcome Miss Ashton Hudson and Miss Carrie Knox. Well, let's just start with a few get to know you questions. This first one is for you, Carrie. I talked about Easterseals Metropolitan Chicago Academy. That is the place where all three of us work. It's where we all met. Can you tell us a little bit about Easterseals as a company? What do we do? What are our main goals? And are we widespread?
Yes. So Easter Seals is a nationwide organization focusing on disability services for children and adults. Our piece of Easter Seals is the affiliate called Easter Seals Serving Chicagoland and Greater Rockford. And there's two pillars to our work. There's the early learning pillar, which is Head Start, early Head Start, services for families, and early intervention. And then there's us. So we are part of the disability services pillar. And the piece of that that's us is the academies. So we are therapeutic day school serving students from kindergarten through age 22. There are three academies. There's the Chicago Academy where we work. There is the Academy in Machesney Park and one in Tinley Park. And like I said, all therapeutic day schools. Also part of our organization, Easterseals Serving Chicagoland and Greater Rockford, is the Illinois Autism Partnership, which builds the capacity of their clients to work with individuals with autism and related disabilities. There is Harry's, used to be called Harry's Buttons, now it's called HB Threads, which is an employment opportunity for individuals with disabilities. Teaches job skills, supported employment type things, and makes all of our uniforms. Yes, and does custom embroidery for different clients. I did look at the website, in preparing for this and think about, what we wanted to say about our organization. And you did ask about the goals. So Easterseals Serving Chicagoland and Greater Rockford, our tagline is embracing abilities, expanding possibilities. And the nationwide organization tagline is empowering people to live full and independent lives. So I think both of those go together very well.
Yeah, so Easterseals, we're a nationwide organization that has different branches in different parts of the country.
Exactly. And if you go to the nationwide website and you type in your area code or your zip code, you will find the affiliate nearest to you.
Right, and I think one of the great things about Easterseals that it's more than just the academies. Like working here in downtown Chicago, I've gotten used to the K through 12 school setting. But when I was growing up, my younger brother went to an Easterseals clinic that mainly focused on occupational therapy and just job skills as well. So it wasn't the whole academy shebang. It was just a little tiny area, but it was so helpful when he was growing up to get him out and about socializing, getting him those skills that meant the world to him. All right, thank you for that. And now this question is going to be for both of you, but Ashton, I'm going to start with you. What got you interested in working in the field of disability support services in general, but also as a paraprofessional?
Yeah, essentially, I got into this work because of a scholarship at UIC called Next for Autism. Me personally, I am a daughter of somebody with a disability that is undiagnosed. But throughout my whole life, I've had erythral amounts of compassion and empathy that I've found myself naturally here in this place, and I'm loving it. I didn't seek this out though. It was brought to me by a friend who introduced me to her brother who has autism, and we became really good friends. And at that moment, she felt the need to put me onto the scholarship, and I found my way to Easter Seals.
That's awesome, Ashton. Just a little bit of context. Next for Autism is a different organization that tries to train the next generation of direct support professionals to help young adults and fully grown adults with autism and other disabilities, helping them live more independent and interconnected lives. I am also on the same scholarship. That's actually how Ashton and I first met, and we were recommended to Easterseals, which we are loving so far. It has been a great next step for the both of us that are interested in helping those with disabilities. Now, Carrie, for you, what you got you interested in working with Easterseals?
Um, well, I was a general education teacher who took 12 years off to stay home and raise my children. And when I went back into the field, I realized, I'm behind because things in education change all the time.
Oh yeah.
And I wasn't up to date on, what was going on in the field of education. So I went back as a substitute teacher in my home district, and I started subbing in special ed classrooms. And I kept getting called to these classrooms as a para, as a teacher. I did a maternity leave teaching sub position. And I realized, oh, this is probably what I should have been doing all along, because I love this. I love the community in the classroom. I love that there's other adults in the classroom where you can say, wow, look at this student just did this thing that they couldn't do last week. And you have other people cheering them on. You have a whole team that you're working with. And then you're watching this group of amazing students learn new skills and, acquire skills so quickly using the supports and the systems that we know work with individuals with disabilities. I saw visual schedules for this first time. I saw routines and structure, and I thought, oh, I kind of want to know more about this. So I went back to school for my LBS1, which is Master's in Special Education, and started working here as my first job. So typically when they teach you, about special education, it's all the different options. It's, resource and working in a self-contained classroom. But I didn't know a lot about working in the therapeutic day school. And boy, did I learn a lot the first couple of years.
Definitely.
There's so much information that you don't know when you first get into this. I relied on my, veteran teachers. I relied on the paraprofessionals that were here long before I was. And I really relied on the internet and just Googling and searching and looking for information out there. And yeah, it's been great. And I've been here since 2010, and I haven't tried anything else in special ed.
Oh, that's awesome. It's really great to hear somebody just serendipitously finding something that makes them want to continue and learn more about that thing, especially when you were talking about just how exciting it can be to work with students, having them learn new things, just being part of their little community for however many times or however many hours a day you get the chance to. It's invigorating. And then this next question's also for you, Carrie. It kind of follows up when you were talking about coming back to school, having there be a lot of advances. From when you first started working at Easterseals, what do you think are the most prominent advances in special education that you've seen?
That's such a good question. I think, like I said, when I first started, I had to look up a lot of information online. And now we have a curriculum map and we have a scope and sequence. Our curriculum is tied to the Common Core standards. We sat here and developed that together as a team. We have material that's tied to the Common Core state standards that's highly adapted and differentiated that we can use. We're not having to seek out all of our information. Our goal is to make sure that our students are experiencing the same information and learning the same information that general education students are learning. Just we have to really adapt it and we have to modify it for our group of students. So knowing that that's out there and being able to find that has been great. And that's been a huge advance. In addition to that, I think just the shift in perspective for transition plans. So I taught high school and then I taught post-secondary education. And, we always thought about what we have to do to plan for the students' next, where they're going after Easterseals, their next journey. So nowadays, transition plans are a little bit more succinct per student. So we have to come up with goals that are specifically related to that student's transition, an independent functioning goal, an employment goal, and an education goal that are specific for those students.
Very, very good. Thank you for that. Now, Ashton, earlier I mentioned that we are both paraprofessionals working here at Easterseals Metropolitan Chicago. What is it that a paraprofessional does on a day-to-day basis, and how have you been liking the job?
Well, to start off to that question, I have been loving the job. Within the classroom as a para, I find myself typically just supporting each student as much as I possibly can in any way I possibly can, honestly. We're usually assigned to students one-to-one or, ones to two, depending on how independent the student may be. But within the classroom, we're just supporting the teacher and the instruction and helping students do their work and, redirecting to complete tasks and, just supporting independence as well within the classroom.
Yeah, I think there's an added wrinkle for the two of us because we're both kind of floater paras. That means we don't have a specific classroom. We just kind of go wherever we're needed the most. I think that's been a very interesting experience for me because I get to see a large view of the students that we have here, a lot of different abilities, basically just a spectrum of how independent a student can be or how much help they will need. But I've also just gotten to make these great connections with all the staff, with all these students. I can walk down the hall and I can realize, hey, there's my little friend there. Or I can say hi to people just when I'm taking somebody for a walk. It's just part of that community.
Honestly,
Yeah.
for me, it is the community. Like
Yeah.
the community aspect of this place is beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things I love about Easter seals. Now, sticking with you for a minute, Ashton, what would you say is the biggest difference between what a paraprofessional does and what a special education teacher or like a teacher would do?
Yeah, from what I experienced in the classroom, I definitely see the teachers they're more instructional. They have to engage the entire class and also like go through the class to individually engage students. We're working with the students to help the teacher instruct the class and keep a flow of the class while also helping them individually work with
Yeah.
students as well. But in turn, I think they do also do more clerical work. Teachers do a lot more like behind the scenes meetings. Parents were more just with the student,
Right.
honestly.
Yeah, the way I see it is just again from my experience is teachers are more focused on the bigger picture of getting the whole class to meet academic goals, to prepare for transitions from this class going to the gym or just rounding up the troops for our next activity, kind of. Carrie, do you have anything to add about the differences between, I guess, what we as paras do and what a teacher does, as your experience?
I love hearing your perspective. I really do. And like I mentioned, I also subbed as a para too, so I've been in that
Right.
position. Yeah, and you're right. The behind the scenes things that teachers are doing, taking baseline data for IEPs, writing IEPs, attending meetings, all of those little outside things, making sure that we're getting grades for students, running the day. And you're right, making sure everybody's staying on schedule. ELA is at 10 o'clock, making sure that we're making that happen, but also directing the paras too.
Hmm.
So you're mindful of, several other adults in the classroom working with the students that you're also mindful of. So it's a big juggling act.
Yes.
Right, yeah, thank you for that. Now, let's get into some terms, some definitions. I mentioned before something called disability culture, and before we get to that definition, I just want to lay some groundwork because it's made up of two words that have very contested definitions that have changed and have been re-examined throughout history and from place to place. Just making sure we're all on the same page, kind of speaking about or knowing what we're talking about. So, as an anthropology student, someone who studies culture, I have been taught many, many different definitions. It's almost like every class has its own definition. And even for some of my disability studies classes, we try to operationally define culture, and it's tricky. It can be very tricky, even though it seems obvious at first. It's kind of one of those you know it when you see it sort of things. But one of the interesting things before I get into the formal definition is that what I've noticed is that people who have attempted to define culture throughout history, it says something about how they are trying to define another person. Like it says something about the person trying to define culture and who is being defined by that term. So culture has been used to elevate certain groups, it's been used to try and disempower other groups. Culture as a word, it also just means like high society. So that's another aspect. But for this podcast, I just want to define culture in simple terms as the shared and socially learned knowledge and patterns of behavior that manifest as a set of beliefs and practices that are held and performed by a defined group of people. So it can be as big as American culture, or as small as, Easterseals culture. It can be used to refer to smaller, not necessarily nationalistic groups. We also use culture sometimes to refer to like fan bases for artists or different media, like different subcultures. It is a word that has taken on so many different uses and can be used to describe so many wonderful facets of life. But in short, whenever people with common interests and common worldviews come together to share what they've been through and to seek companionship with one another, they create a culture defined by that shared worldview and those experiences. So, Ashton, you were mentioning before the community here at Easterseals is probably one of the best things about our jobs here, just getting to know all the people, all of the students, and that in and of itself is its own culture, the culture of Easterseals, and I think in some way of special education, kind of a culture defined by helping our students and going through our day-to-day tasks. So, going based off that definition of culture, in your experience, what role does it play in the classroom or even meeting with parents outside the classroom? Carrie, we can start with you.
Sure. I think, like Ashton said, like each classroom becomes a little community. That's actually one of the best parts about being a teacher is, you've got your community, then you have the community at the whole school together. And you have your shared values, you have your shared expectations, you have, kind of the way you do things, and that becomes the culture of the classroom. And then the same thing with our whole school, the culture of the school, the feel good piece of it, I always say is it's passionate people doing something that they love. On the best day, that's who we are. We're people doing a really hard job. And I think the values that we hold together are, independence for our students, creating opportunity, making sure that, if our students are succeeding here, that we're helping them prepare for that next step. Not everybody stays in our setting forever. But yeah, I think it develops throughout the shared experiences of the people together in the classroom, but also in the school together. When we meet together as an entire community on Fridays, when the staff meets together, it feels like a community. And we do talk about, getting on the right track. So, active supervision is part of our culture here. We're counting the students, we're making sure that students are where they're supposed to be at all times. And, using common terminology is a piece of that too.
Okay, very insightful. Thank you for that answer. Ashton, do you have anything to add? Like, as a paraprofessional, what role does culture play in what you do?
I see it on the level of like everyone individually brings something that makes it what it is. So it's like getting to know each student and seeing like how brilliant they are and, how they navigate the world. And also everybody else who works here who brings their best foot every day and like just the people in general. It's like everybody, it brings a piece of themselves here and it allows for there to be a good community here. That's what I feel.
Oh, that was very nice. Very well put, Ashton.
Thank
Yeah, everybody, like in terms of culture, we are surrounded by culture in every aspect of our lives, and people just pick up parts of different cultures that they're exposed to, and they bring it with them everywhere they go. So this building, the Easterseals as a whole, has a lot of different people coming from many different cultures, but at the end of the day, we all come together. Actually, in the middle of the day because it's school, but yeah, we all come together and share what we have, and it creates something bigger than the sum of its parts. Something that we all have learned to love and find just great joy in being a part of. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about culture as a whole.
I agree.
All right. Defining disability. Things get slightly more complicated as a disability studies student, just like with culture. I've learned that disability has been defined and redefined again and again. Definitions of disability says something about who is making that definition, who is being defined by that definition, and why. Again, sometimes it has to do with power, sometimes it has to do with visible difference and the need to define that for some people. But in disability studies, we use what's known as models, which are like lenses or frameworks for guiding our research and our discussions about disability, because there are many, many different ways of approaching the concept of disability. The two big ones that I want to mention today that we deal with in disability studies are the medical model and the social model, which you may or may not have heard of those terms before. They've become a lot more popular, especially with the passing of the ADA. But first things first, the medical model is a model that only sees disability as an individual health issue or something that can only be dealt with via medication and needs care and cure, which, that has throughout history helped us with our understanding of the human body, physiology. It can help us find out, if certain medicines or certain methods of care can help people with disabilities. But the thing about the medical model is that not only does it individualize and make someone's disability like their problem, but it really doesn't recognize how living with a disability can affect one's social life, how they navigate the world and the society around them, as well as the physical environments. It really makes it so that a disability is only one person's problem, as there is nothing that the rest of us in society can do. And for many, many years, that was the dominant way of viewing disability. But around the civil rights era in the 60s, we have a lot of people standing up against discrimination, against oppression. And from that period of time, the foundation is laid for disability rights activists to use many of the same methods and ideas that were championed during that time to get what's known as the social model of disability. So instead of viewing disability as, a sickness or an illness, it is seen rather as a social construction, something that arises as a result of somebody who lives with an impairment interacting with inaccessible physical environments or inaccessible attitudes, like the stigmas or stereotypes that we hold about people with disabilities. Now, importantly, this model makes a distinction between disability as a concept, what happens when somebody, goes into an inaccessible environment, and impairment, which is like the actual physical or mental condition that resides in the body. So it is not necessarily the impairment that is disabling to someone, but it is how the outside world reacts to that impairment and kind of builds the social and physical structures of society around it. Now, I think it's important to clarify that neither of these ways of seeing disability or approaching the concept are necessarily wrong, but they just have different ways of viewing the same concept and pick out different things that they believe are the important things. Like there are some disabilities or some conditions where medicine and medical treatment can help dramatically, but many times the real disabling factors in people's lives are the barriers that society creates. It is not having any ramps or any elevators, or not having a place for someone who might be overstimulated to go and cool down. So, in short, if you want just like what disability is, it's what happens when a person with an impairment is unable to participate in major life activities as a result of their condition interacting with an inaccessible environment and different ableist attitudes and stigmas. And this way of viewing disability is kind of the main one that we focus on nowadays in disability studies. And it made me reflect and rethink many of the things that I thought about what it meant to live with a disability. I started to see the external factors that contribute to somebody not being able to participate. And then I also have a few quotes here that I hope can help bring a little bit more light onto this definition that I'm giving. First, we have disability is fluid and contextual rather than biological. This does not mean that biology does not play out in our minds and bodies, but that the definition of disability is imposed upon certain kinds of minds and bodies. A person has a learning disability if put in a scholarly setting. Using a wheelchair becomes a disability and a disadvantage when the environment is inaccessible. And someone who wears glasses may be disabled without them when attempting to read written language or see far away. But this can change depending on the context that they are seeing and being seen within. I know that was a lot of words, and I hope that that wasn't like too academic, that you were able to pick up some things from that. Have either of you, first of all, heard about this specific definition of disability as being unable to participate in major life activities? Ashton, we can start with you.
Honestly, I feel that has sort of been the notion that I got from learning about disability, like just growing up. Disability was always seen as something like, oh, somebody is, they're impaired and they can't participate in the same things as somebody who might be able-bodied per se.
Okay, Carrie, you have anything to add?
I think when you think in terms of, a disability, I think it makes it become more limiting. And because you did say, it depends on the setting.
Yeah.
So if you go to a movie theater and you're not able to participate because it's too loud or, there's too many people, if there was a quiet space to go to, you could participate. And I think just taking those pieces into account in our world would allow for accessibility for a lot more individuals.
Yeah, and another thing that I kind of learned as a disability studies student is that the inaccessibility of the environment kind of creates a feedback loop that, in some cases, further discourages people with disabilities from interacting. So the whole concept goes, if people believe that those with disabilities, don't go out or don't have a social life or don't need to interact with the physical environment, then they will create architectural and physical structures that reflect those ideas where the needs and necessities of those with disabilities aren't taken into account. And when that happens, well, then people with disabilities aren't able to interact with those spaces or go to those places or just be out and integrate with their community, with society as a whole. Because of that, they go out less or they are unable, physically unable to interact with the society around them. And then again, that leads to the perception that people with disabilities don't go out much because they're not seen in the environment because of the way we have created and designed the world around us. This is a very interesting concept that I actually took a whole class that used that kind of as its basis. It had this whole chart, and each time it would add a different part so we can see just how much the physical environment at times can become disabling. So, we have one more definition to get to. This is the really exciting part. As both an anthropology student and a disability and human development student, I've learned about culture and disability separately, learning about those contested definitions. But in my studies, I learned about something that I mentioned earlier called disability culture that bridges the two fields, which actually have a lot of overlap. Anthropology studies humanity and what binds us together, what are the commonalities between civilizations and cultures, whereas disability studies looks at the concept of abnormality and how we apply that to people and rethinking these conceptions of deficit, disability, or just reconceptualizing how we can format our society to include more people. Now, this definition of disability culture combining both of these concepts, just the written definition I have is the group identity of people with disabilities based on sharing a common history of discrimination, shared values, and similar perspectives and experiences living with disability. That's just words on a page, but we've kind of been talking about that before, talking about the little communities and kind of microcultures within each of the classrooms, and then the larger culture of Easterseals as an organization being dedicated to helping students and young adults with various disabilities in an inaccessible world. So the way I described it, had a lot of words and it's, kind of academic, but there's really no substitute for experiencing it, like actually being a part of the community and a part of the students' lives. And I have another quote from a 1996 research article that focused on the creation of positive disability identity. People with disabilities have forged a group identity. We share a common history of oppression and a common bond of resilience. We generate art, music, literature, and other expressions of our lives, our culture, infused from our experience of disability. Most importantly, we are proud of ourselves as people with disabilities. We claim our disabilities with pride as part of our identity. We are who we are. We are people with disabilities. Again, a lot of words, a lot of big concepts. But before I get into some of these next questions, I just wanted to talk a little bit about disability studies because I've been mentioning that a lot, kind of as my field, as what I am learning about. But what does it actually mean? What is disability studies? The first thing is that it's not about studying specific disabilities or specific conditions with the intent to try to pathologize or to cure these things, but rather disability studies looks at the overarching concept of disability as a whole and analyzes the historical, social, and cultural meanings that we ascribe to certain conditions, to certain bodies, and to certain minds, kind of breaking down the social construction of disability, of how we as people create that concept and apply it to others. Now that I've kind of described disability culture in terms of like definitions and academic background, have either of you heard of disability culture before, or at least been exposed to what it means to be part of disability culture? Carrie, we can start with you.
Yes, maybe not necessarily exactly in the terms that you
Right.
used, but yes, I am.
Awesome. Ashton?
Yeah, I haven't heard of the term, but it was there before I probably heard the term, and it makes sense. There's a shirt in HB Threads that says, "Don't diss my ability." And it just reminds me of like that the culture that is cultivated here
Right.
in terms of understanding disability culture and like, the shared values of the community here. And yeah,
Yeah, no, that was very well put. That's a very common thing for those in the disability community, especially those engaged with activism and advocacy. They use humor a lot. That's definitely a phrase I've heard before. Now, for Carrie, now that I've, again, gone a little bit in depth on disability culture, how have you seen this concept play a role in what we do at Easterseals?
It reminds me so much of when I went to school to be a special education teacher, we learned person first language.
Yes.
And, you are a person with autism. This is a person with Down syndrome. And the shift from person first language to identity first language, which, people in the autism community are now saying, no, I'm autistic. And that's what I want you to call me. My identity comes before that. And being able to define what you are versus someone else defining who you are was like a light bulb in my head. Person first language is really hard for me to shift from doing that because that's what I was trained in school. That was like the first day of school. It was, this is how you address people with a disability. And now thinking about who am I to say who you are? You're telling me you want me to say that you're autistic. You are a person who is autistic. Great. I would rather have you tell me what you want me to call you. And I think that gives so much empowerment to the community. We also talk a lot about neurodiversity here. And just terms like that. We talk about the difference between autism awareness versus autism acceptance and how that has come through, through the years. The shift from, this is a person with autism to we're celebrating your neurodiversity. We're excited that you're here with us and you bring so much to our community. We have a talent show in a couple of weeks.
Yes, we do.
And that is, we have it in the month of April for a reason. Our students who want to participate. And what do you guys see it?
Oh, I'm excited. I've seen some of the students in the classes I work for start preparing, doing their auditions, and then going to practice at the gym for a little bit at the end of the day. I don't know if I'll actually be working on the day of the talent show, but I'm very excited for what these kids will be able to present, and I know they're excited to get on up there and show the world what they've got. But I really liked your explanation of that, Carrie, especially talking about identity and person first language. It has been a bigger shift, especially within the community. Before, person first was kind of like the standard. People would just say an autistic person or a disabled person. And then people in the community were like, hey, no, I'm a person first. I want you to emphasize my personhood, because at that time, living with a disability, the dominant discourse or the stereotype was they, can't do all the things that a non-disabled person can do, or their personhood is put second because their disability, which is on display, is what society wanted to focus on. But now we see another shift from, we're not all the same. We're not, I mean, we are all people, but we definitely have tangible physical abilities that make it difficult for us to engage or be a part of society the way that people who don't live with those conditions are able to do. So this is the linguistics minor in me speaking, but that's the cool thing about language. It's how it changes and how it reflects different ideas and discourses in society. Now, Ashton, as a paraprofessional, Carrie mentioned a lot about what role disability culture plays in what we do here. How does what she described look different on the ground or like in each individual classroom?
Well, it's just being able to meet and be with students who come from all different kinds of backgrounds and accepting them and them accepting you right back. It's just one of those things, honestly. That to me is what makes the culture. From a paraprofessional standpoint, it's all the little bright, shining stars of students, honestly, that make it. And then the teachers and the other paraprofessionals and the admins who help us and know also everybody here as well.
Right, it's that they've taken the time to better understand these students, to be with them, and to treat them as human beings, not patients, not clients, not. I mean, there are our students, but not exclusively, like treating them as just, students to go through the day with. They're our little friends, which is the organization that I worked for before Easterseals. So, little Easter egg there. But, um, yeah, each and every one of these guys I say are my little friends, not just because they're so tiny, but
Right.
because we tend to work with the smaller kids. They really like hanging out with, the bigger guys. It's just fun. Okay, so now that we have some of that out of the way, I want to talk about how some of these concepts and other aspects of disability studies can be applied to special education and different alternative academies like the one that we work at. Now, disability covers a pretty wide range of conditions, what I just described, from behavioral, developmental, physical disabilities, even chronic illness falls under this umbrella term that categorizes people of all different abilities under the same term socially and in some cases legally when it comes to getting certain protections or being available for benefits. Now, in preparing for this episode, I read some research articles about how viewing disability through the lens of culture can be very helpful in certain settings. And the social model of disability has helped those of all abilities come together, form that group identity, and better advocate for their rights in law and policy. However, only seeing disability as a result of the external or social environment runs the risk of further separating people from the supports that they need. And I think we kind of touched on this a little bit when I was talking about the social model at first. But in one of the articles I read called Disability as Cultural Difference Implications for Special Education, the researchers bring up how the social model, as viewed by theorists in the field, how they see the physical environment as and social stigmas as the main reason for disability and why people with impairments face hardships in their day-to-day life. This article, I think, brings up a really interesting point that even in the absence of all social barriers, all stigma, and even in the absence of certain architectural barriers, a disability still exists. It is still a tangible thing that has an effect on one's life. So even if we modify our social and physical environments to the most that we can, there are still some things that remain out of reach or remain much more difficult for those with impairments. So it may be useful to consider what role the environment and our own attitudes play in contributing to the experience of disability. That's not the whole story. It doesn't give us the full picture of the disabled experience. The authors go on to further talk about special education and the schools and locations that these take place in, that based on certain social model ideas, that separating students from their typically developing peers is not something that we should do in a society that allegedly values inclusion or integration, with the belief that separating students from their typically developing peers only further emphasizes their differences and makes them feel like they're not as good or second class students, which is a thought that I felt was kind of exaggerated, but I could definitely see where the idea comes from because, there's more to disability than just the environment. There's more to disability than social stigma. And so the authors go on to say that radical inclusion could further perpetuate certain injustices by making it harder to get in contact with the resources and the professionals that know how to help students with disabilities. Because, as we know, a lot of our students here, specifically at Easterseals, we deal with a lot of autism and different developmental and behavioral disabilities that cause our students to sometimes act out in big ways that not all people could be ready for. Like, it takes a very specific person and a very specific mindset to know what it is that you'll be in for during a typical day at school. So there's this really great quote in the paper that I want to highlight about the two surefire ways to perpetuate social injustice. The first is by treating students with typical abilities unequally due to irrelevant differences, say skin color, gender. But the second is by treating students of all abilities equally and discounting the impact that their impairment has on how they interact with the environment. It's this idea that all people are the same and should be treated equally because, that's equal. That's what we value. But when it comes to students with different abilities, that's just not always going to work. These students are different, and that's okay. We just need to be aware of that difference and realize that it does impact how they move around the world and how they interact on a day-to-day basis. So pausing there just really quickly, I just want to ask both of you, from what I have described so far, how does Easter Seals in each of our little classrooms and as an organization, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, how does that contribute to the creation of disability identity, of creating connections between our students and our staff? Carrie, we can start with you.
I think here we do a lot of relationship building, like Ashton was saying. Like, one of the best things about working in a smaller setting is knowing everybody and knowing the students really well. And for the two of you as floaters, you get to know a lot of students. But the key to being successful in working with our students is building a relationship. From that, and everybody's an individual. So you need to start with every single student, get to know them, get to know what they like, what they don't like, what their triggers might be, what they're motivated by. Then we can offer choice. We can offer different options for our students. We can teach them to advocate for things that they want as well, and just develop their own self-confidence in being in our setting.
Very nice, very nice. It's interesting you mention neurodiversity because a few weeks ago we had a neurodiversity celebration week, and in one of the classes I was in, we did a whole little lesson about that, about the history behind it, and I think that was a nice way of connecting the general school, like trying to get students through the day, but also bringing into their lives and into the lives of the staff concepts of disability studies, of celebrating neurodiversity. Because we've all heard, if we were all the same, the world would be boring. And that applies to different kinds of bodies and different kinds of minds. And I think that definitely can help some of these students better advocate for their needs, knowing that it's okay that they need to do something differently or that a need for them completing it will look different than for somebody else. Ashton, do you have anything to say about how we here at Easterseals contribute to positive disability identity formation?
Yeah. From what you were describing, it reminded me of the term like being culturally relevant
Mm,
and engaging with students. And it's really just knowing the student and knowing the people around you and being relevant to the student in their own individual abilities and interests and likes and dislikes. I think all of that contributes to a better community in classroom and everything as a whole, because I think it's important to genuinely know who you're interacting with, if that makes sense.
no, definitely.
I have a cute little story that I can share.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
But along the lines of what you were saying about, learning about neurodiversity, I was in a classroom last week and they were talking about World Down Syndrome Day. So it was a story that they were reading and they were talking about chromosomes and, the differences in people with Down syndrome. And one of the students out of nowhere said, "Oh, I have such and such disability." And I was thinking, way to go. Like, way to make that connection and way to just say it like, hey, it's a fact. We're talking about this and I'm going to share about me. I just thought it was really cool.
Right. And that's another way that I think the concept of disability culture can apply because it is on the topic of disability, but also connecting and personalizing it, like connecting it with your own experiences and worldviews and thoughts and opinions. And that is how we create disability culture by coming together, by letting people know about our disabilities and just letting the world know that people with disabilities are here and they have rights to be here and rights to interact with society the same way that we all do. Now, Carrie, this next one is for you. In your experience working with students with disabilities, what role does integration or inclusion play in the work that we do? Is that always the end goal for a student to be integrated into general education, or is there more to it?
Sure. So in special education, we love a good acronym. So we have IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the components of that are really relevant for us are something called FAPE, FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. Everyone is entitled to that.
Absolutely.
In the LRE, that's the rest of the acronym, which is the least restrictive environment. So when you are working together as a team to develop a student's IEP, you are thinking about what the least restrictive environment is. Where are they going to be able to learn the best? And where potentially are behaviors that they might engage in not going to impact others' education? So you're considering all of that. And first of all, you're starting in general education. Could the student be successful in general education without any supports? And then if you say no, could they be successful in general education with supports? You go down the continuum of supports, and on the continuum of supports, we're a very restrictive setting. All of our students have disabilities. All of our students have IEPs. The goal for our students is to get to a less restrictive setting, which may look like you don't have a one-to-one aide anymore. It may look like you don't have a bus aide anymore. It may look like, you have more independence within our setting. It may look like you reintegrate to your home district. That does happen sometimes. So it's definitely a continuum. It's definitely LRE is always the goal. And it's every year when we write the IEP, we think about that. And it looks different for everybody, obviously, because we're very individualized.
All right, thank you for that. And kind of connecting it back to what I was talking about before with this research article that kind of focused on what role special education plays in this formation of disability identity. It's not like organizations like this just take kids because they have disabilities or learning difficulties and put them here because nobody else wants to deal with them. It's because we know that their needs need to be acted on in different ways than other neurotypically developing students. That different is not bad. Atypical is not something that we should be afraid to say. Every human being to some extent is different and learns in different ways. It's just that our students more so need different, much more individualized care. And like you mentioned, we try to go with the least restrictive setting. We are seeing if it is possible to reintegrate some of our students into general education to be back with their home district. Sometimes that's possible through, a lot of work, IEP goals, making sure students know how to advocate for themselves and their own needs, but sometimes just based on, again, social norms and societal structures, it's not always possible for students to be in these general education settings for their own convenience, for the convenience of family members, but also safety. There are some safety concerns with students if they have a disability and they need certain medication at a certain time, or they need to work with a mobility device. And also for those with different behavioral disabilities, those outbursts need to be professionally handled. And general education teachers are good at handling students and kids, but it just looks very different when you're actually on the ground and working with these students one on one. We do our best with what we have, and some days are better than others, but every day we are always keeping our students' best interests in mind. At least that's the way I see it. Let's move on to the second article that I read. This one was called Disability as Cultural Identity. And very similarly to the last article, it looks at how special education can be a site for the positive valuation of a disability identity and advocates for seeing disability through the lens of culture and how that can help students develop a sort of identity and better advocate for their needs. First of all, there's a quote from the article. I don't know which one of you brought it up, but it was really good about, I think it was you, Carrie, wanting to have certain terms to like refer to you as, or defining yourself in terms of your own culture, not having somebody else do it. Um, Only people who value themselves and listen carefully to their own voices have a culture of their own rather than a secondhand culture gifted to them as the price of a silent acquiescence to unthinking normality. So, as you were mentioning before, with the change in person first to identity first language, people with disabilities realizing that they want that part of their identity to be highlighted and to make that a part of their culture instead of just accepting from medical professionals or from other people, this is what disability means. It is a mindset of deficit. It means you can't do these things, you can't interact. Yeah, says you, but I'm the one actually living the experience. So I kindly will be responsible, or I will determine what it is that I would like to do. But this article, again, talks about disability as culture, viewing disability through the lens of culture. That if, like the other article said, if the end goal was to have all students to be integrated into general education, just putting all students with neurotypically developing peers would strip them of a part of their identity, and insisting that all students be treated the same, again, further separates students from resources and services that they materially benefit from. It essentially equates to erasing a part of their culture and identity and trying to like bandage parts of their lives or their existences that make it difficult for them. And the article ends by talking about how special education and alternative schools have this opportunity to be a site that values a disabled identity and fosters a positive identity for our students. And I think I brought up Neurodiversity History Week, how that or Neurodiversity Celebration Week, learning about different kinds of minds and different disabilities. I think that, and this thought kind of like stuck with me as I was reading the article, like one of the ways that we could sort of work towards positive valuation is to do more things similar to learning about Neurodiversity Celebration Week. We can learn about different disability activists who have changed the landscape of disabled rights and justice. Just like we did with Black History Month not too long ago. If anybody works in special education, you'll know of News to You, which is this really great children's website for or it's for educators, for their students, to give them this information about history, science, math, in a more digestible, fun way for students and staff to learn about. I find myself learning a lot about Black history during the month of February from News to You. And, I always look forward to seeing what our new subject will be. But I think it would be really cool if, in April for Autism Acceptance Month or July for Disability Pride Month, we took some time to learn about different activists and their struggles, like Ed Roberts and Adapt with accessible transportation. And of course, Judy Heumann's amazing speech to the San Francisco Congress that helped push through a lot of these accessible policies that made it easier for those with disabilities to navigate the world. And then before we end, I have just a few questions. This one's for both of you, but we'll start with you, Ashton. How can we at Easter Seals, more than what I've already mentioned, contribute towards positive disability identity and, making sure that our students are able to advocate for themselves and see themselves in a positive light?
I think that starts with allowing the children to, well, students, sorry, to
Yeah.
own it, to own their disabilities, to own where they come from, to own the things they like and dislike, and be able to voice that, and also respond to them and listen to them, and also advocate for them in the best way possible.
Very good. Very nice. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think this reminds me of communication. And so many of our students communicate in different ways. We have assistive technology devices. We have students who use verbal speech. We have students who use gestures, and not insisting upon one way of communicating. So if you're a multimodal communicator and today you want to talk to me and tomorrow you want to use your device, and I may talk to you on your device as well, just accepting your communication and what you're trying to tell me and the way that you're trying to experience it at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very good thoughts right there. So before we close out, just what these two articles are trying to get at, or at least my interpretation, is that the social model of disability has been great for many things. It helped people with disabilities come together, forge a group identity, and advocate for their rights in law and policy. It has helped advanced social perceptions of those with disabilities, showing people that they are here and not leaving anytime soon. But what they're really trying to get at is that there is more to the story than disability as a result of the environment and attitudes. There's an entire way of life and of living that those who live or work with those with disabilities understand is different from a lot of the social norms that we are exposed to or we're taught to accept. That disability as a concept is so much more far reaching and can't really be neatly defined by any one model, and it kind of needs to be evaluated and reevaluated as we're confronted with it. So as a sibling, for me, that means knowing that there are certain things I have to avoid or certain things that I shouldn't say to make sure my brother doesn't have an outburst or a crisis. As a paraprofessional, it means being patient and flexible with students when they're having a hard day or maybe they're not ready to do a certain activity. But in general, for me, it has meant letting go of the conception of how things should be, how we want things to be, and instead focusing on the present moment, how it is, and how we can best accommodate for the people and the situations that we are faced with in life. Because, there are a lot of things we wish could be different. There are a lot of things we wish we could change, but we just can't. And for those living with disabilities, for some, they can't change having that disability. There's no amount of medication, no amount of therapy that will make them not have autism or make them not have behavioral difficulties. So there are just things we have to accept and work with the best we can. And by understanding the disability experience through this lens of culture and through disability studies, learning about these different models, I've been able to bring this perspective into my work and my personal life. And I can see the similarities that I share with my students, both as a sibling, as someone who worked or lived with someone with autism, but also some of the similarities that I see within myself. And, like sometimes I don't like certain loud noises, or I need to take a break, or I need to take a walk because, walking is very good for the human body, very good for the mind. There are so many, I don't know, things that we try to point out that separates us from other people, especially when it comes to people as different as our students. But what I've realized is the things that connect us or that bind us together are so much stronger and are so much more universal. Now, the way that I see our work here at Easterseals, in terms of everything we've been talking about, is that when a student walks through our doors and enters their class, the environmental and social stigmas that the social model brings up no longer exist, as we try our best to accommodate the students that we work with and create a fully inclusive environment that serves all students of all abilities as best as we can, because we have so many students with so many different abilities. And we may not be perfect every day, may not be, sunshine, rainbows, lollipops, but we try. And every day we try to understand. And that's something we brought up a lot, of understanding what it is these students experience on a day to day. We may not be able to understand what's going on in their head, but understanding that they are having trouble and understanding the struggles that they go through and working hard to minimize those barriers is what defines our work as paraprofessionals, as those in disability support service. And as someone who's known about Easter Seals as an organization, that is how I've thought of Easter Seals and their line of work, even before I started working here. You have anything else you would like to say to the folks at home, or to anything about disability culture, identity, or the work that we do here?
If I were to say anything, it's just that, I see myself in every other person in the world, honestly. I think that we all sort of navigate this place almost like in a sense of like where we all come from the same thing, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that absolutely does.
So I feel that I don't treat everyone equally, but I can see that I feel for everyone the same. Everyone is, whether disability or non-disability, that's still a human, and they
Yeah.
still have like this life. They still have a personality. They still are somebody to get to
Oh
know.
yeah. No, that reminds me of the difference between equality and equity, treating everybody the same versus treating everybody in accordance with their needs and their capacity at any given time. That was very well put. Thank you for that, Ashton. Carrie, do you have any closing thoughts?
So good, Ashton. That's hard to follow up. I think as an educator, what I learned from participating in this, Andrew, is just that being a lifelong learner is so important. Like knowing these terms, reading your research articles, having the opportunity to really sit down and think through all of this and how it impacts our students and think about the bigger world out there was really an important, impactful thing for me. So thank you.
I'm glad that you guys both enjoyed this, that you took something away from this. Hopefully we can use this information for the people we work with and beyond. Thank you all for tuning in to this very first episode of my new podcast series. If you found something interesting while you were listening, leave a comment or tell somebody you know who you think would be interested. By listening today, you, yes you, have taken a step to furthering your understanding of disabilities and the people who have them. Disability is a natural and normal part of our everyday lives, and even if you personally don't have a disability or know anybody with a disability, chances are that someone you know loves someone with a disability. And now you're more informed on the topic. We'll see you next time.